The Multi-Ministry Task Force has announced and explained the framework for the reopening of our economy and society over 3 phases. So let me now briefly sketch out what all of us can expect in the coming weeks. The circuit breaker will end on the 1st of June, and thereafter we embark on Phase 1, which we have already announced and explained. Phase 1 alone will see about 75% of the economy resuming operations. Thereafter, we will continue to monitor the situation, particularly over the first 2 weeks of June. If the community transmission, if infection rates over these 2 weeks remain low and stable, then we will decide by the middle of June on whether we want to take the next step to move to Phase 2. And that means that Phase 2 could happen before the end of June. Broadly speaking, Phase 2 will entail the resumption of a wider range of activities, and we expect almost the entire economy to reopen by the start of Phase 2. And the broad items that we are looking at for resumption of activities in Phase 2 would include, for example, retail shops and consumer services. It would include dining in at F&B outlets, but subject to a cap of up to 5 people. It would include the opening of sports facilities and more public venues, including stadiums and swimming pools. It would include allowing social interactions and family visits, again subject to this group size capped at 5 people. There will be activities in higher risk settings which we will have to look at more carefully. These are typically activities or venues with large gatherings of people or close contacts of people in enclosed spaces. They would include places like museums, libraries, cinemas and theaters, religious functions. They would also include venues like bars, pubs, clubs and discos. All of these venues and settings, based on our experience and overseas experience, have been instances where there have been cases of transmission in such settings. And so we want to take a more cautious approach for activities in these areas to resume. So what we will do is we will begin conversations and discussions with businesses and organizations across these different settings on the safeguards and safe management measures that will be needed. And subject to these measures being in place, we will then discuss with the entities on the precise timing of when they can resume activities within Phase 2. So they may not all resume at the start of Phase 2, but if they have the safeguards and precautions in place, they could resume later, but still within Phase 2. In parallel, while we talk about reopening of these activities in our community, in parallel, we are also continuing with conversations and work on reopening our borders, establishing travel bubbles with countries where the virus situation is under control, and having safe green lane travel arrangements with specific countries. And the idea is to have clear protocols in place that would include testing of travelers from one country to Singapore and vice versa. And with these testing protocols in place, we can have assurance that the traveler is free from infection, and then essential travel can then resume step by step, right, depending on the countries that we have established these green lanes or travel bubbles with. So that's work in progress. The conversations and the discussions we are having with countries vary, some at more advanced stages, some we are just starting. And as and when we are ready, we will announce more details on any particular country for which we have reached agreement. This will allow essential travel to resume, and particularly for businesses that are based here in Singapore, where their staff and employees need to have some travel around the region. I think this is going to be an important measure that will allow not only business to resume, but jobs to continue. And we can then ensure that Singaporeans can continue to work, not just in Singapore, but in places where they need to travel for work. Having these arrangements does not mean that we will allow mass market travel. That will take a bit longer. So the arrangements I've just described refers to essential travel, subject to all the arrangements and safeguards as I've just described, and the travel bubble that we would work out with respective countries. It's not for mass market travel, which I think would take a lot longer to resume, not just in Singapore, but also internationally. So those are the things that we are working on now, and we thought it would be useful to share with Singaporeans to give everyone a clearer sense of what to expect over the coming weeks, both in terms of the reopening, phase 1, and then subsequently to phase 2 before the end of June, possibly, as I said, depending on the situation and the assessment of our community transmission in the first 2 weeks of June. And also, we are working on easing of travel restrictions and resuming of travel with specific countries. As we do all of these things, we can expect activity level to rise, and therefore, I want to reiterate what Minister Gan said just now. It is even more important for everyone to take responsibility of their actions, because with more activities, the likelihood of transmission rises, and we have to be prepared that there will be more cases. So it's all the more important for us to stay vigilant, to be socially responsible, and to do all the necessary things that each individual has to do. Do not just rely on government measures or government rules. All of us have to do our part as individuals, uphold high standards of personal hygiene, wear a mask when we are out, and see a doctor if we are ill, all these basic precautions that we have been talking about since the start of the outbreak. For businesses too, they have to take responsibility, put in place safe management practices in their workplaces, ensure that their work settings are safe, not only for their employees, but also for their customers. And we certainly hope that businesses will step up. For those that are unable to resume operations immediately after the circuit breaker, use this period, use the next few weeks to put in place all the necessary precautions and measures that you can in your work premise and make it safe for your employees as well as your customers. This is absolutely critical in order for us to be able to resume safely. And as we prepare ahead for phase 1 and later phase 2, we will continue, of course, to be vigilant and take prompt enforcement action. Businesses must be aware that if a case were to emerge in their workplace setting, if clusters were to emerge later, they run the risk of having their entire outlet, their entire business or shop closed for quite a while. So I think this should give every incentive for businesses to take responsibility and to do their part to put in place all the necessary precautions and safeguards so that they can resume and reopen safely. So I hope this provides a better sense of what everyone can expect in the coming weeks. The situation is uncertain, it is fluid, many things can change, but we've put out as much as we can the information or the things that Singaporeans can expect in the coming weeks ahead so that everyone has a clearer picture of what we will be embarking towards, starting with phase 1 and then moving on to phase 2 later on. Thank you.